He'd heard stories about it, of course, just like everyone else who'd ever worked in a library or an archive. The excited chatter of curators uncovering a lost work of art in some dusty attic, only for it to turn out to be a brazen fake. It's crafted in the 20th century with nothing but the most base of intentions to defraud unsuspecting collectors. But it was never supposed to happen to him. Not while he was cataloging the books in the estate of one of America's oldest families, meticulously checking each one against the records of their published editions. It would have been impossible to forge all of these, surely not in time for their inclusion in the family home's private library, which stretched back for centuries of American history. It wasn't until his third week on the job that it happened. He was working through the poetry section when he noticed a book of sonnets by an author named Bonnyman. The edition was first published in 1897, and this copy had belonged to her grandson, annotated with his neat Spencerian script in the margins. But something was off. No one at the estate had ever heard of Bonnyman. Her name didn't appear in any of their records or in any of their family trees. And no copies of her book were listed in any bibliographies or literary histories. That in itself wouldn't have been so strange. Private presses often produced small runs of books, especially for debut authors or local poets. And they didn't always do much to publicize them. But the more he looked into it, the odder it became. He discovered that the book's publication date, 1897, was actually 4 years after Bonnyman's death, according to the records of the family's home. And he found that the annotations in the margins of their copy of the book contained inside jokes and references to places and events that hadn't happened yet. There was a mention of a trip to Paris in 1904, for example, and a reference to the sinking of the Titanic, which went down in 1911. The book had been printed decades after she died, and the person who owned it had written about events that hadn't happened yet. He brought his concerns to the head of the estate, a distinguished woman in her late 60s, who introduced herself only as Mrs. Belweather. She listened patiently to his theories about a mysterious author, a private press run, and a hoax. When he was done, she gave a humorless laugh and said, "I think you're overthinking things. Bonnyman was my great-grandmother." She waved away his questions about the anachronisms in the book as the eccentricities of an old woman. "People who've lived for a very long time sometimes get confused about dates," she said. "But why would she write about events that hadn't happened yet?" he asked. Mrs. Belweather shrugged. "I don't know. Ask her yourself." And with that cryptic answer, she turned and walked away. He didn't see her again for almost 2 weeks. He was working on the second floor of the library then, cataloging a collection of Victorian novels, when he felt a prickling at the back of his neck. He turned slowly and saw the ghost of a woman standing behind him, clad in a black dress that looked like it had come straight out of one of the novels he was reading. Before he could get a good look at her face, she vanished. Startled, he called out for help and found the head of preservation standing at the top of the ladder dusting the shelves. "Did you see anyone else up here?" he asked. "No," she replied, climbing down the ladder. "You must have been seeing things. This place is empty. It's been empty for decades." For the next few days, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched. And every night when he stayed late to finish his work, he heard the rustle of pages deep in the stacks. By the end of the week, he was sure that the books were moving themselves. He came to that conclusion after finding that 2 volumes of poetry by Lord Byron had somehow lost 20 pages each. The missing sections weren't in the book's binding anywhere, nor were they on the floor or shoved into the shelves around them. And he could find no record of them having ever existed outside of the book. Their pages were gone forever. His first thought was to check the restricted stacks. Those were kept under lock and key and were only accessible with a special key. Only 2 people at the estate had the combination. But when he checked there, he found that 2 more books were missing entire sections. One was a first edition of Jane Eyre, and the other was a collection of fairy tales by Hans Christian Andersen. The missing pages from those books had appeared in the same 2 volumes that contained the additional poems by Bonnyman. To make sense of what he was seeing, he pulled out the 3 books and laid them side by side. Each of the missing chapters from the other books had been crudely sewn into the blank spaces between Bonnyman's poems, as if someone had used her book as a receptacle for their disappearance. When he went to put the books back, his hand brushed against a strange indentation in the spine of the Bonnyman volume. He pressed his thumb into it and found that it gave way. He pulled the cover away and found that the whole back of the book was loose. Inside, he discovered a hollowed-out space where a number of folded sheets had been hidden. They were too small to be pages from any book he knew, but they were definitely there. He carefully unfolded them and found that they contained the missing chapters from Hans Christian Andersen's fairy tales. They had been folded in such a way that they fit perfectly into the space behind the cover, hiding in plain sight all along. He repeated this process with the other 2 books, finding the missing chapters from Lord Byron and Jane Eyre stored in the front covers of those volumes. Then he searched through the rest of the poetry collection and found that the missing pages from Pinocchio and the Jungle Book were hidden in the front and back covers of a book of Tennyson poems, while the missing chapters from Ivanhoe and A Christmas Carol were concealed in the poetry of Robert Browning. All of the books that he found contained passages from the 19th century. What did it all mean? Was this a prank played by whoever had lived in this house before it was sealed off from the world? Or was there something more sinister at play? He considered calling the police, but who would he tell them to investigate? A ghost who rearranged books in the middle of the night? He tried asking the woman who he thought might be that ghost, but he couldn't find Mrs. Belweather anywhere in the house. In fact, he soon learned that she'd left town without telling anyone where she was going, and no one had seen her since. It was as if she and all of the secrets of this house had vanished into thin air. One evening, as he was closing up the library for the night, he heard a noise in the stacks. He froze, listening intently, and heard it again, the rustle of paper. He grabbed a flashlight and climbed the ladder to where the sound seemed to be coming from. Shining the beam through the gloom, he found the ghost of a woman standing over an open book. She was hunched over it, seemingly lost in concentration as she read. Startled, he called out to her, and she jumped, dropping the book and letting out a scream that echoed through the empty library. She quickly bent down and started gathering up the pages, stuffing them into her dress. But he rushed over and stopped her. "Wait," he said. "Who are you?" She looked up at him with wide eyes and whispered, "I'm sorry, but I can't talk to you. You shouldn't be here." She tried to push past him, but he stepped in her way. "Why are you hiding?" he asked. "And why are you taking these books apart?" She struggled to keep her voice steady, fighting back tears. "I'm sorry," she choked out, "but I really don't have time to explain." She pushed past him and fled up the ladder. As he watched her go, he saw that she was carrying a sheet of paper in her hand. He realized it was one of the missing pages from Pinocchio. He followed her as fast as he could, racing up the ladder and out onto the landing. He chased her through the maze of empty hallways until she disappeared around a corner. Breathless, he came to a stop against a cold stone wall. There was nowhere else for her to go. He cautiously made his way down the hallway and found a door at its far end. He knocked on it tentatively, half expecting no one to answer. But to his surprise, the door swung inward, revealing a dark, narrow staircase spiraling down into the shadows. He hesitated only for a moment before stepping inside. He could hear the echo of the woman's footsteps on the stone steps below him, and he followed, descending into the darkness. As he reached the bottom of the stairs, he heard a click and the sound of a door latch. Turning, he saw that the staircase had vanished behind him, leaving him alone in a dusty, windowless room. There was a single desk in the center, piled high with papers and books, and sitting behind it was the woman from the library. "Who are you?" he asked. "And what is this place?" She sighed, leaning back in her chair. "My name doesn't matter," she said, "but I'm the reason these books are the way they are. I've been taking care of this house for a long time, watching over its memories. But now it's time for me to move on." She stood up, stretching stiff joints and shuffling toward the door. "You want to know what happened to Mrs. Belweather? Follow me." He hesitated for only a second before following her out of the room. As they walked down the hallway together, she told him about the portal in the stairwell, a gateway that had been sealed with magic long ago. But once a year, on the anniversary of her passing, it opened for a single night, allowing her to return to the house that forgot. Every year, she would watch over her beloved family's home, collecting the scattered pieces of its past and restoring them to their rightful places. But now that someone had found her secret, she could no longer keep guarding the house. It would have to find another caretaker. With that, she stepped into the shimmering portal. "Will I see you again?" he asked. She smiled sadly and replied, "We'll always have the books." Then she was gone. Now he was alone in the silent house. With the portal sealed once more, he had no way of knowing how long he'd have before it opened again. He took a deep breath and walked toward the desk where countless memories waited to be rediscovered. He picked up the nearest book and opened it, revealing a faded inscription on the flyleaf. It read, "To my dearest sister, may the words of these poets bring you comfort in times of sorrow, and may their stories fill your heart with joy, with love everlasting." And on the page facing it, he found another note, this one scrawled in a spidery hand. "Anne Bonnyman was my great-grandmother, and this book was passed down to me through the women in our family for generations. When I die, I leave it to my heirs with the request that they take good care of it and share its stories with those they love. Whoever finds this book after I'm gone, please take good care of it." He traced the faded ink with his finger, feeling a profound connection to the generations of women who had loved these stories before him. He understood now why he had been chosen to find this place. He was a link in a chain of storytellers reaching back through time, bound together by the timeless power of literature.